Hello, okay. Dad, today is Wednesday, May 15th, and
Okay, so we are starting now.
we are starting. Yeah,
Okay.
we're live right now.
All right, we're live.
Or not live, recording. But this is, we got video for the first time, so we'll probably see a huge drop-off in followers after they see your face, so... but let's get started.
Okay.
I want to start with something that I just saw breaking the news this morning. Was that Robert Fico, the Slovakian prime minister, was just shot.
Right.
Did you see that?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, apparently it looks like he's going to survive. Yeah, the assassin fired 4 bullets. He was in some town in Slovakia. And apparently this person is a member of a liberal party, or not maybe a member of the party, but a supporter of a liberal party in Slovakia, has been a long-time opponent of Prime Minister Fico. And, well, his brother says he also has psychiatric issues. So, I think often that's the case of assassins, but it does seem to have been politically motivated. Of course, Fico is unusual in the European Union in that he is friendly to Russia. And, he's been advocating a negotiated settlement, and he has refused to ship any more arms to Ukraine. Now, interestingly, he is on the left. He is a former communist and continues to, is a self-described leftist. So that's, generally parties and politicians that are friendly to Russia are described as being on the right or even far right, though I think that's obviously, a ridiculous label. But that's not always the case. Fico's on the left. There's an important politician in Germany that's on the left that's also friendly to Russia.
Yeah, you think of people like Viktor Orban or something as a sort of the right-wing,
right,
anti-Russian candidate. So do you think that this...
not anti-Russian, pro-Russian.
Oh, yeah, sorry, pro-Russian candidate. Did you think Fico, the person that shot Fico, was... did it because of Fico's support of Russia or not support, just his friendly demeanor? It's got to be, right? I mean, I don't want to jump to speculation, but I mean, when I first saw it, I was like, "Oh, this sounds like something Budanov would do. This sounds like something the Ukrainians might try to do." Do you think that I'm right here? Oh, it looks like we lost. Well, are you still there, Dad?
Okay. Yes, I am. I can see you.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm here. We just don't have any evidence of that. I don't think that's likely. I think it's more, it's personal. It may be this person is worked up. We don't know about what the particular, policy of FICO or whatever that angers him. But it very well, probably the most emotional issue is support or support for Ukraine or as it, or a stance of neutrality is, that's the stance that FICO's taken. It is a very emotional issue, so it very well could be what motivated this person to attack him, but we just don't know yet.
Or here's another theory. I find it kind of odd that we have these Eastern European leaders with very American-sounding names. We got Donald and Robert. Donald Tusk is the Prime Minister of Poland, and then Robert Fico is the Prime Minister of Slovakia. What's the deal with these Donald and Robert? I'm just joking, obviously.
Okay.
But
right. Yeah, well, the Donald, I think that's pretty odd. I mean, Robert isn't necessarily English. You can say Robert, or it could be a different language. I don't know if it's a normal language. In Polish, though, it doesn't sound very Polish to me. So, I'm sorry, we're talking about Slovakia. It doesn't sound Slovakian, but what do I know?
Yeah, do they translate the names? Like,
I don't
his
know.
name
I don't
is
think
actually...
you don't do that. When you're like giving the name of a president of a foreign country, you don't translate the name.
Right. Well, that's something I think somebody out there should look into.
Right.
Robert and Donald. I don't like that. Okay, well, maybe we can just jump into something else. I know you've been following this very closely, but from my understanding is the Russians just kind of marched into Kharkov. There was supposed to be a defensive line around Kharkov, the Kharkov region, but it seems like it existed only on paper. That what I'm hearing is that there were these hundreds of billions of dollars that we sent to Ukraine. A large portion of it was supposed to be allocated to building these very advanced fortifications around Kharkov to protect it. And they were supposed to be built, but it looked like that money was just all embezzled. There was $200 million that just kind of that was set aside for those fortifications, and there was nothing there. They just kind of walked in. Is that accurate, or can you give us some more details on that?
I believe it is. I've come across many reports that support your assertion. There was supposed to be a defensive line, not right at the border. It's hard to build, when you're very close to the front line, because of course any kind of work is subject to artillery fire. It makes it difficult to carry out the work. So you wanted to set it back a little ways, but there doesn't seem to be any defensive line. There was supposed to be one approximately at these two towns that Russia is currently storming. One is Lipsy, the other is Volchask, and there really doesn't seem to be anything there. And I've seen pictures, for example, of piles of dragon's teeth. These are supposed to be set up on the ground as tank barriers. Somebody, they're delivered to there where the work was supposed to be done, but the work was never done. So this is not actually, these reports are not coming from Russia. They're actually coming from within Ukraine. It's Ukrainian media that's just furious about this. They're saying, look, you had, weeks, actually months, people, it's been clear that this was where the Russians were likely to launch their next offensive. And nothing was done. Money was spent, but nothing was done, and the Ukrainians themselves are outraged.
How could that happen? Shouldn't somebody be checking on it, or is this just a sign that there's just a complete breakdown?
Right. Obviously, there's it's indicative of corruption and incompetence at many levels. It's not just that one contractor didn't carry through, but of course, the inspections should have been carried out. They weren't. So it has to be, I think people have criticized Syrskyi directly. I think that's correct, but probably the work should have been started well before Syrskyi, took his position as the head of Ukrainian armed forces. It seems to be a systemic problem. I mean, we've always heard about Ukrainian corruption, and this is just a glaring example of it. I guess also should point out that before the fortification, you should have what they call a security zone. There should be firing points and minefields, right? That's what the Russians did when they were preparing for the Ukrainian offensive of last summer. Well, they prepared months in advance and actually had from anywhere from 3 to 6 lines of fortifications. And ahead of those fortifications, they had a security zone which had very dense minefields. And we can remember, really the awful scenes of carnage as the Ukrainians tried to cross these. And it took them forever. Eventually they managed to penetrate that security zone, but it took them weeks and weeks to do it. And then finally, towards the end of the offensive, they managed to just reach, not breach, but actually just reach the first line of fortifications. That was close to a town called Robotino in Zaporozhye.
I remember, yeah.
And actually today, the Russian Ministry of Defense announced that the Russian armed forces had taken back Robotino. So that was like their big prize. They finally had gotten down to Robotino. It took some months to do that, and then now they've lost it. So there really was just nothing achieved by that offensive. And obviously the Russians had prepared very well. I mean, if this is symbolic or reflective of the kind of the competence and professionalism of these two armies, and I think it is. it obviously shows that Russia comes out looking a lot better. I mean, it just looks like this is a competently run organization, and clearly there's some corruption, as we've heard from recent news, but it's nothing like on the scale of what we're seeing in Ukraine.
Did we supply Ukraine with a bunch of mines that they were supposed to seed?
I believe we did. Yeah, no, I think that's months ago, but I do recall hearing a report. It's understood that they're actually very important. The mines are pretty cheap. I mean, you would think that that's something that they would really focus on. But, yeah, it looks like the incompetence probably extends to the West, too. I mean, just poor strategy and unrealistic expectations. Just the whole offensive of last year for Ukraine was obviously based on unrealistic assumptions. And
can you hear Felix crying?
I can, yes.
Okay, well, apologies anyway listening. Hopefully it won't last too long. Okay. I got two kids under the age of 2 here, under the age of 3. I mean, but so
right.
It's a bit rough. So what happened? So what happened to these mines? Do you think? Are they just sitting in a warehouse, or are a lot of these munitions? You think are being sold into the black market?
Who knows? Who knows? Right? It could be either. I do recall a report that they were being supplied, that they had them, and that supposedly they were going to, laying minefields. But it just maybe they laid them somewhere, but they didn't lay them in Kharkov, where they obviously were needed. And again, that's something that's a cheap solution. I mean, that's something, minefields are very effective, are a major obstacle to any army. And mines are not very expensive, but they didn't do it. This is just, it is breathtakingly, incompetent or corrupt, or probably both.
Right, and these mines nowadays, they're not like you have to go out with a shovel and a pickaxe and dig holes and put them in. Now they just see them with drones, right? It's very easy.
Well,
or they drop them. How do they work exactly?
Okay, but that's not how I think you do it on a large scale. You don't. But okay, there are mine layers, big machines that can lay them directly on the ground, ground vehicles. But they also can be actually launched, from a great distance. They scattered across a field. I think that that's something you do generally during combat. But it can be done. Like, for example, if the
short on time.
Yeah, short on time. Yeah. Exactly. Oh, it's going to happen next week. You could start scattering them with using these launch vehicles. But that didn't happen.
So,
if you're subject to fire, or whatever, you're too close to the Russian forces. They could have used that method, but they didn't use any method apparently.
Yeah, it just kind of begs the question: if this is a very easy solution, you can quickly, like you said, you can just shoot them out into a field and then lay down some minefields if you don't have time to use the mine layer. They're very cheap. They were supplied to the United States. Then why wasn't it done? Well, yeah. Why would they not do it? If it's such a quick, easy solution, do you think that some of the people that maybe were in charge of the defense of Kharkov were just like, forget it. We want the Russians to take the city anyways, or are they just thinking, let's just take as much money as we can and run for the hills? Like, well,
I
what's
think
the thinking?
It's probably most likely the latter. I mean, it's corruption, but I think also it's been maybe. It's a consequence of Ukraine's kind of inflated sense of its own abilities. I mean, just the fact that they launched that offensive last year, again, it was disastrous. They just didn't get anywhere. They should have, as some, a few advisors in the West were telling them, you should just go on defense, when you're the weaker party, because defense always it's easier to defend than it is to carry out an offensive. And they should have been aware. They should have accepted the fact that they were the weaker party and gone on defense, and they should have done that actually starting last year. But they didn't. I mean, there was just obviously a refusal to believe that, and so they've continued to just Well, for example, in Kharkov, we've had a number of these attacks, these border raids. That's what they were focusing on, which accomplished nothing, but simply, angered the Russians and probably contributed, to this decision to launch an offensive in Kharkov. Because of these attacks, these border raids and the artillery attacks on Belgorod and other cities there, they saw the need for a buffer zone. So that's, if anything, the strategy, if you want to call it that the Ukrainians were using in the Kharkov region, proved to, not only did it fail, but actually it just made their situation worse.
Do you think that Zelensky was aware that the fortifications weren't being set up? Is he aware of the amount of embezzlement and the amount of money going through? He's got to be complicit to some extent, right? Because obviously he's taking a fair amount for himself. He's probably got a mansion in Cyprus or, someplace like that. So do you think he was aware that is he even trying to win this war anymore? Is he trying to fight it really? Or is he just like, what's the...
I think he is, but as has been said, even by there was a piece that was done, I think it was Time magazine, the fall of last year, where the journalists actually interviewed a number of close aides, and they said that he was delusional. That you just can't tell him what's really happening on the front lines. He doesn't want to hear it. He always seems to believe that victory's around the corner and it's just a matter of will and of conscripting a few more Ukrainians and getting some more weapons from the West, and we can do it. And, we can't admit defeat. I think going on the defensive seems to him like an admission of defeat. It may be that, he didn't, he wasn't really concerned about defenses because which is crazy, of course it is. It's just totally unrealistic because he still has this fantasy of some great offensive that's going to, they're going to march to Moscow someday after taking back Crimea.
Is Syrskyi this delusional as well?
Well, what I understand about Syrskyi is that he is just... kind of really a puppet of Zelensky. He's just Zelensky's creature, and that's why Zelensky, has put him there. Zaluzhny would sometimes, he didn't get along with Zelensky, and Zaluzhny would question some of, Zelensky's strategies. Zaluzhny, whatever you might say about him, he is associated with these far-right groups and so on, but he clearly was more realistic. He had for example, he said before Avdiivka fell, he said that Avdiivka is likely to fall. I think he expected in 2 months. I think it ended up being even faster than he said, but he was pretty close. And Zelensky, again, wouldn't hear it. He made a trip to Avdiivka or somewhere nearby, and again, declared that they were going to stand and hold it and then turn back the Russian hordes. But yet, once again, he was wrong.
Okay, well, he may be delusional and not want to hear what's happening on the front lines, but he can't avoid reality forever. The news of Kharkov falling is going to reach his ears. He has to understand that that it's over. He's losing. What do you think he's? Well,
what I understand is like in his recent appearances, he seemed particularly glum and pessimistic. Often he seems unrealistically upbeat, and recently he's starting to talk in a gloomier manner.
There was some statement made from the White House. I don't remember it exactly, but it kind of left the door open for saying that we might have a regime change in Ukraine, right? That they're basically saying that the Ukrainians can decide if they want to have a new person. Is that right? Do you know what I'm talking about? Did you hear something about that? I wish I remember the quote exactly. Yeah, I heard something that kind of left it open that there might be a new person in charge in Ukraine.
Oh, I missed that if that was out there.
I may have
actually recently. I think he may even still be there. Blinken, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, has been Kiev. I made a surprise visit to Kiev just a couple of days ago, and
Yeah.
he is from at least we don't know what he said in private, but in his public appearances, he actually lent his support to Zelensky, and he even seemed to suggest that that elections weren't really necessary at this point, and that.
Okay,
so
maybe that's
like,
what I heard, and I just completely misunderstood it.
Yeah. So anyway, the U.S. administration seems to be still is continuing to back Zelensky.
Yeah, I saw Blinken playing Living in the Free World in a bar in Ukraine.
Right.
Just want to say, if anybody's seen that clip, it's kind of funny because it's in the middle of a guitar solo and it shows Blinken, strumming the guitar. But the lead guitarist is actually the background behind the Blinken. Blinken isn't actually shredding up the guitar. He's just strumming. If anybody sees that, so at first I was like, oh, maybe Blinken's actually a pretty good guitar player, but no, he's just doing some. But no, he doesn't seem to. He wasn't the lead guitar player. Anyways, okay. Is there anything else we want to talk about in Ukraine? Any big updates that you want to add?
No, I think we've said enough about it.
Okay, I'm going to just completely pivot somewhere else now. I've just been on Twitter, and I've been seeing this guy, Nick Fuentes, all over the place. Yeah. Do you know about this guy? Who is Nick Fuentes?
I don't really know him very well. Okay, it's the sort of person that I know of. I haven't followed him directly. He's a name, that's been on the, you've heard on the dissident right over the last several years. I think he probably first rose to fame. I might guess is to dissident right fame in 2016, around the time that Trump was elected. And yeah, he's somebody, a lot of people, a lot of the alt-right figures have faded away or apostatized or in prison or, one thing or another. But Nick Fuentes, continues to go. I think it's fair to characterize him as alt-right.
What does alt-right even really mean? I feel like everybody's that's not left is starting to be grouped in this alt-right. A lot of people, because a lot of people are politically homeless now. A lot of people are like, well, I'm not really a conservative. I'm not really I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. So then you get labeled, Joe Rogan's alt-right now. We're probably straight up, the establishment. How would we be labeled? They'd probably straight up label us as neo-Nazis or something.
Yeah, right. You can't trust the labels that, of course, the mainstream media puts. Often they don't really even understand these various movements. But alt-right.
What are the movements?
It obviously means alternative right, and I say it's just you say it's right in a. It's maybe like the closer to the European right. One thing is that let's say in contrast to mainstream conservatism. First of all, it's not necessarily wedded to market capitalism. It doesn't have to be, there's some that have more libertarian leanings, and then others have even more socialist leanings, but they can both be alt-right. So it's not so much, where that was at least a couple decades ago, the center of gravity for the mainstream right. We're about market capitalism. We're about, reducing government interference in the economy. That's at one time that was a big part of what being the right was. Now that's actually kind of fading in mainstream capitalism, mainstream conservatism too. But I say especially on the alt-right. And then the alt-right touches some of the electric third rails that mainstream conservatism doesn't want to deal with. And one is the Jewish question, and another is races, like differences between the races. I think that, so we have all of those there. Let's see, is there something else that we'd use to define it? I think also is a difference in style. It's just sort of and especially, an attitude towards the American empire and the U.S. Whereas in mainstream conservatism, you get a lot of kind of saluting the flag, and we're the greatest country in the world. It's they continue to embrace American exceptionalism and generally to support overseas adventures. On the alt-right, there is a great deal of skepticism or outright hostility towards the American empire. Say it's time for America to come back home. And in the Middle East, say we no longer will we fight our wars on behalf of Israel. And then, sort of a general ridicule. I guess that's part of it. It's a stylistic difference. Young, irreverent people who maybe ridiculed the patriotism and the kind of the notions of respectability that mainstream conservative still had and still does have. All of those things, you make a brew. There are different people kind of that emphasize different aspects of it, but I think those are some of the main elements.
Yeah. This might be a really impossible question, but are you able to kind of define and kind of partition all the movements, political movements in the United States? Because I have trouble kind of keep finding where I belong and where other people belong. We kind of just roughly put people in the Democratic Republican camp, but that doesn't seem to work. And then also we just have two candidates that don't seem to really represent what people want now. So there seems to be a lot of these alternative movements that are gaining traction, ideas that are being popular that are not adopted by either party or might be adopted by both or one or the other. You know what I mean? So can we define who these people are? I mean, can you even define us?
I can't hear you very well.
Okay, is it better now?
Okay.
Hello? Yeah, it says trying to reconnect. Yeah,
right. Okay, yeah, I can hear you better now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you get my question?
Okay, well, I'd say the alt-right doesn't really exist as the alt-right I don't think really exists as a unified phenomenon anymore. I mean, it had its heyday in maybe the first couple years of Trump's first term, or his only term so far. But it was, I would say, it's basically crushed. There was the protests in Charlottesville, and that was followed by extensive lawfare. I mean, after all these people that were there that participated in that were pursued with lawsuits, and others were deplatformed. And so in general, it's one thing. It's been driven from the streets. It used to have some kind of street presence. There were actual demonstrations, and I think after Charlottesville, it was generally understood that that's just not possible. To have for somebody who is anybody that's labeled as far right is just not going to have going to be able to demonstrate or establish a presence out in physical space. It's just that it's a combination of law enforcement and Antifa. These kind of leftist militias immediately attack them, the police don't necessarily attack these demonstrators, but they don't defend them. So they found they just don't have it. It's not safe to go out and protest in the real world. So, the survivors of the alt-right are basically online now, and there's seems like they've kind of split off in different directions. I think Nick Fuentes, again, I haven't really studied him, but my understanding is that he can, at least considers himself a traditional Catholic. So he and some others kind of emphasize their Christian faith. But then there are other alt-right, far right, you might say, people who are actually, virulently anti-Christian. And it seems like it's not a unified. There was an effort sometimes, at Charlottesville. It was called Unite the Right. The idea was to bring all these dissident right groups together. There's nothing like that anymore. There's no real effort to bring them all together. It's just they're disparate groups and individuals, and Nick Fuentes is just one of them. So that's what we would call the dissident right. People who are on the right, meaning I think like the essence of the right, when we talk about the right, is that it believes in hierarchy. I mean, that there is a natural hierarchy and a natural structure to society that needs to be sustained. There's the family, there's the father, mother, children, this real basic stuff. But that, there's a church or some other organization that also provides structure to a society. These are all, of course, traditional structures that they aim. Well, in some cases, they aim to restore, or maybe some of these new right anti-Christian people want to establish a completely new kind of hierarchy. But there are a lot of people. I mean, it's still it's kind of it's a fringe presence now. I mean, it seemed to be gaining a lot of traction back in 2016 through 2018, and it's for real. They're online, and people, a lot of young people, especially young men, are influenced by them. And but I think the numbers are probably quite small if you look at the whole country. There's a lot of people that are just in this sort of kind of big, broader, mushy middle.
Right.
Now we have. One thing I was just say quickly is that you have the MAGA movement, but that seems to have become, to me, sort of a personality cult in part. It's just obviously centered on Trump as a person, and then if Trump embodied certain principles, it would be more meaningful. But he just tends to flip-flop, as he did dramatically over Ukraine recently. But the true MAGA, believers, they just flip-flop with him. No matter what he does. So that's part of it. But then you have, I think it's more than that. I mean, that actually Trump and maybe kind of second, and even the alt-right had an influence on the larger culture, or on the right side of the spectrum. So you do have people that they don't really have, let's say, an organized party. They haven't established themselves as a separate party or even named themselves as a movement. But you do, for example, we had a lot of dissidents within the Republican Party who, in spite of Trump's flip-flop, still voted, actually a majority of Republicans who voted against aid for Ukraine. And so there is this growing resistance, that you just didn't see before on the Republican side towards American imperial, ventures and support for various foreign wars. So
right.
There is this. I guess you would call them kind of. We won't call them, Trump supporters or MAGA people, but maybe America First. That was an idea that Trump put out there, and I think, the alt-right in a different way, and so you do see that there's some people that you might put in the America First camp of the Republican Party, and I think probably the best example of that is Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Yeah, I was going to bring up the America First movement as part of as sort of a new movement here within the right. Sort of like you said, is it fair to say that you have the MAGA movement, which is just whatever Trump does, he's the man. Look at him, he's just dropping bombs and dunking on Biden. And then you have the America First movement, which personally I identify with the most. The idea that no reason to send money and have these wars overseas. We got enough problems at home. We got an open border. We got homeless people all over. We got $35 trillion of debt. I think we could do some. Can you hear me now? Yeah, the internet. My father's in a cabin in the middle.
I lost you for a few seconds, but I can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay. Well, anybody listening, my father's in a cabin in the middle of the woods. Okay. Doesn't always stay there, but okay. Hopefully.
Okay, I can hear you.
Okay, I was just saying how you're in a cabin in the middle of the woods right now. Okay, anyways, I was just saying that, I feel like we kind of have three kind of movements on the right.
In the woods right now.
Right. We got the MAGA party, and then you got the America First. And then would you say basically everybody else that's kind of...
Yeah, I'm not hearing you right now. I'm sorry.
Damn it. Okay. It says try to reconnect. Okay, hopefully we get this working. Can you hear me now?
Okay. If we can't, we can. I can hear you now.
Okay. All right. I think the audio will be recorded locally.
Oh.
Okay. Okay. Well, we can we can try. We can end it pretty soon if it keeps on having technical difficulties. We'll just have a shorter episode today.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I want to rehash kind of my train of thought, but I do think it's an interesting thing to explore a little bit further, though. Just kind of these third-party movements moving within the U.S. political system. You know, I mean, RFK is an interesting person in and of itself, showing that there's a real, rise of a third-party candidate. Right. The America First movement is something new. We have this alt-right movement, MAGA, just whatever Trump does is awesome. Is there any other kind of new movements maybe coming from the left? I mean, because the left also is cracking. There's a fissure in the left. We have people that are very upset what's happening in Gaza, which I borrow as well. So it's kind of funny. I will hear Bernie Sanders say something, and I'm like, Bernie Sanders, that was awesome. I love that you said it. I wish you said it earlier, about that we need to stop supporting this genocide in Gaza. And then I'll hear Marjorie Taylor Greene say something, and I'm like, that's great too. So I'm in this camp where I'm like, okay, Bernie Sanders, pretty cool here. Marjorie Taylor Greene, pretty cool here. What does that make me? Does that make me crazy?
Well, right. No. Well, the thing is, it's true. It's sort of, I find the same thing. Of course, you do find a few, call them, dissidents on the right who are also, strongly support the Palestinians, and there are, but they're very few, to be honest. So I would put myself in their camp. In general, I think you got to put me on the right, but often I find myself in complete agreement with people who are clearly leftists, and and when they say something that's true, I support them 100%. And there are many such people now. This war in Gaza is so horrible, and I think it's so important that it's just not a, I consider them allies. These leftists, they're not. Maybe when the whole thing's over, we'll find ourselves on the opposite side of something else. But let's just be honest. When somebody's right about something, give them credit for it, support them, stand by them. It is a strange situation. I find myself in the same thing where I find myself on the left foot and then on the right foot, and without a real home. But it's not crazy. You can say I think it's really the country that's crazy, the way that it's fragmenting. It doesn't need to fragment in the way that it has. There's no real rhyme or reason to it. And if you go overseas, actually, you get outside of the United States and its close allies, you'll find different kinds of political alignments, and I think you would find it much easier to find people with similar attitudes, similar sets of beliefs. That's what again your sister is finding in Moscow. But it's not just Russia. I think it's really all around the world. It's just that there is kind of a sane look, what I consider to be a sane way of looking at the world. That's really very not at all fringe or even dissident in many parts of the world, but is here in America, and I think that's because of just the peculiar situation or political phase that America is going through right now.
So, is there a term you would use to describe any of the fragmentation on the left? That we were able to kind of define movements on the right. Is there anything to talk about the movements on the left?
Well, I would say there is even like predating this the Gaza war, there has been kind of an anti-imperialist left that's always been there. It's been small, there is an anti-imperialist wing on the right, which I have to say is larger, but it's maybe softer. I don't know if that's quite the word to use, but you'll find somebody like Marjorie Taylor Greene. I think she's completely right about Russia and some other issues, but then she's a fervent supporter, as I understand it, of Israel. There's more inconsistency.
Yeah, the conservatives, they love Israel. That's the problem. I was kind of finding myself embodying more of the conservative movement until this whole thing happened in Israel, and then I could just hear the language from some of these Republican senators and congressmen just calling for the mass slaughter and cheering it on, and say especially, man, Lindsey Graham, that guy's just sick, man. He's just crazy.
Yeah, he always has been, right? It doesn't have to be Israel. He's just always for war, whatever.
He's from South Carolina, right?
Yeah.
He's is that reflective of what people in South Carolina think? How do they keep voting this madman in?
I don't. Again, I think what you find is like most people are not really, are not fervent supporters of these foreign wars. In general, there's actually discontent, and I think, Marjorie Taylor Greene and the rest of them, who again says we should be spending this money to meet needs at home. I think that most Republican voters think the same way. Now, they may make a certain maybe large proportion of them, maybe even a majority of them, make an exception for Israel, unfortunately. But yeah, Lindsey Graham is just for every war, and I don't think he's really reflecting as some sort of groundswell, within the state of South Carolina. That's just his own obsession. And it's not an obsession that's shared by the majority of Republican voters.
Yeah, I've been to Charleston. Man, they seem like normal folks over there. So,
I guess I just say again that there is this, a sane American first tendency that you find on the right, but like within. Well, to be honest, like if you go within, if you look at Congress, there are very few people that are at all consistent. Like maybe one person you can point to is the Libertarian Thomas Massey in Kentucky.
He's my boy.
So he actually has been consistent about it and has opposed, from what I understand, funding for the war in Israel. But he's just one. But then the thing is, to be honest, if you look at the Democrats in Congress, we had a few. It was 35 that opposed the funding for the Gaza war, but absolutely zero opposed funding for Ukraine. And you did have, again, you had over 100 that opposed it for Ukraine. And then, even on the Israel question, there were something like 20 that opposed it. It was less than the Democrats, but there was. So, I guess all in all, if you look at the numbers, you have to say, okay, well, often these people are kind of inconsistent or whatever, but there does seem to be more of an anti-foreign venture, more of an America first, bring the troops home kind of, or not necessarily the troops, but bring the money home, stop spending on these foreign wars on the Republican side than on the Democratic side. It's just, if you go outside of the Congress and just, looking at media, there are dissident right people that I think are consistent in their opposition to the American empire. They definitely are, and they're important. People like Larry Johnson or Phil Giraldi, Colonel Douglas McGregor, right? So these people exist, but I think you find that there's more such people on the left. Again, like in total numbers, it's pretty small, but they do have an impact. I'm thinking of the Gray Zone. That's a very good leftist, anti-imperialist site. Or Consortium News. That's another one. It's another leftist, anti-imperial website. It seems like that in general you find more firepower, we'll say, intellectual firepower on the left on these questions and more consistency. But it's, looking at the actually politicians, it's pretty pathetic what the left has to show. There's really nobody. I mean, at least on the right you have Thomas Massey,
Yeah, well, it's pretty sad that that's all we got. It doesn't look
Yeah,
good for
right,
us. Our political parties or politicians are pretty gross.
right.
I have a question.
Yeah, so I mean these. So right, I think there's an awful lot of so out there in the middle. You know, there are a lot of people who are unhappy, but they just don't really have much of an understanding. Um, you'll see. I think there's a potential for a new party, for a real movement. It could happen. It could happen on the left or the right, or maybe it'll be somewhere else entirely different. You know, a movement that not too likely, but it would be nice if there was a movement that managed to straddle both left and right.
Hmm.
But we don't have it in any really significant numbers now.
Right. I have a question. It seems like we're able to pass bills to send huge amounts of money for wars. That we can just do $100 billion, and we spend $1 trillion on the Iraq war, right? Like we've sent hundreds of billions to Ukraine, and it doesn't seem like there's that much resistance. There was here at the very end from the Republicans, but it came through. But we spent a lot of money,
Right.
gave a lot of money very quickly. It doesn't seem like there was much of a discussion about it in the beginning. Like, okay, we'll send this aid package. But it seems like when there's an issue here in the United States, why is it so difficult to get any money to help the citizens? I'm thinking of, for example, the fires in Maui. These are American
Right.
citizens that lost their homes, their livelihoods in this horrific natural disaster. Although
Right.
maybe it's not so natural, it seems like it was incompetence of trying to go too green and not having the budget to keep the power lines clean. But we won't go into that now. But anyways, they getting money to help these Americans out doesn't seem to be there. I think FEMA gave them each family a couple $100, basically enough to go to Walmart. But then we can send hundreds of billions to Ukraine, and then they do God knows what with that money. Clearly not building defensive lines.
Right.
So why is that? Why can't we spend money on our own citizens here to help them when they really need it? It seems like we do spend a lot of money internally, but doesn't actually help people when there's
Yeah.
something that we need to
Yeah.
do to help citizens.
Right.
It doesn't seem to, the money doesn't
Yeah,
flow.
yeah, right. Another example is just there's obviously a pressing need for investment in infrastructure in the country. I mean, every time I go down the interstate here, I see the potholes, and I always curse silently the government, saying, "Yeah, okay, $61 billion to Ukraine, but you just can't fill the potholes out." I mean, maybe it's silly, it's trivial, but it's also true. Really, why is that? And I think if you asked people, most people would agree with us on that. I think that is not a fringe opinion or whatever. And most people agree that the money should be going to meet needs here at home, rather than going overseas. It's just I guess it's just these, it's the Israel lobby, and it's the military-industrial complex. It's money, and lobby groups, and these tightly organized, ideologically driven factions that end up controlling and dictating what kind of policy we pursue. Again, I guess last time you asked me whether we're a democracy or not, and that's actually another example of where, well, if we were a democracy, meaning that our policies reflect, the will of the people, this clearly would not be happening. But it is.
Right. Yeah. It's just crazy that you say like the Israeli lobby or whatever is dictating where our money goes. But even then, shouldn't they be like, okay, they don't care how much money they spend. We have $35 trillion of debt. Shouldn't they be able to say like, okay, we'll pass $100 billion. We'll just kick $1 billion over and fix all the potholes. It's not that much. Fixing a pothole is easy.
Right.
It doesn't. I just don't understand. If
I don't know.
We don't care about how much we
I don't
spend.
understand either.
Right. It's obvious that we don't care how much the government doesn't care how much it spends.
Right.
That's why we're adding $1 trillion of debt
Right.
every day. Take just 1% of that.
Every 100 days, right? Yeah.
Right, every 100 days. I would take that 1% of that $1 trillion every 100 days.
Right.
Think about how much you could do. If we could redo our infrastructure, we could have high-speed rail, fix the potholes, solve the homelessness problems. We can have a border security, well, whatever it is that we want to do.
Yeah.
But it's like they're
Well,
actively.
Right.
Do they
I
want
think
to
well,
destroy the country?
No, I don't think so. I think that the problem is that unfortunately, our representatives in Congress, they don't feel the pressure to do that because there aren't lobbying groups like the Fix the Potholes group. There's no real money in that, and there's nobody that has some sort of ideological obsession, like such as Zionism or hatred of Russia or something. And, that's just a need that common people want met. And there's, unfortunately, the fact that common people just want this met doesn't translate into lobbying power. It doesn't translate into money, and that's not what our representatives. So they're not.
It's such a big problem. It's such a big problem. So bullshit. I mean, there should only be one lobby in the United States, and that's the American people. The American people are the only lobby. The government is supposed to listen to us, but they clearly don't.
Right. You should run for office. That sounds like a good stump speech that you're putting together right there.
Yeah, I know. There's no way.
The thing, it is surprising. I think it's really. It just shows that a lot of the people we elect are just corrupt, in the end. Because whatever you think of Marjorie Taylor Greene, she actually says what's on the minds of a lot of people. And some of these things may be ridiculous, but a lot of them are just very true. And so she's popular in her home district. I mean, it's just you can, if you stand up to the establishment, it actually doesn't mean that you're going to lose your election. Most people, most voters respond well to it. I'll give you another example. It's just Ron Paul. Obviously he was about as anti-establishment as you can get, and he was from he represented a very conservative district in Texas, and was reelected again and again and again. He opposed every war. Supposedly these people, you say, well, these are conservative Texans. Of course they're for war. Well, not really. It's just like they have somebody who tells them straight. They see he's a good guy and they believe in him and they support him. And they're just more people that just had some sort of backbone. They could do this, and actually they would thrive. But it's just like these people get there, and it's just, the lobbyist comes knocking on the door, and then, and they get a visit from, who knows whom, and they're just telling this is how we do things here, and they
spineless.
Maybe they were elected, on the ticket of draining the swamp, but they very quickly become swamp creatures.
Yeah, I agree. If a politician has the balls to actually, you got to get going.
Yeah, I probably should. I'm hoping to. Okay. Well, Chip is down there by the water there.
Okay, sure. We can stop.
And your mother too.
Okay, yeah, we're already almost at an hour, and we can just finish that. I like the ending if the politician had the balls, we'll stop there. Continue from that part. From that point next week.
Right.
Okay. Well, tell Chip I said hey, and have fun fishing.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot, Dad. Okay. Bye.
All right. Bye.